My daughter called me late that night and said, "Dad, tomorrow I'm getting married. I've already emptied your bank accounts and sold your house. Goodbye." I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling my knees nearly give out. For a moment, I thought my heart might stop. Then something unexpected happened. I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because she had no idea what she had just done. She thought I was an old confused fool who wouldn't understand. But tomorrow, when she walks down that aisle in her white dress, someone else will be waiting for her there, the police. Hello friends, thank you for being here. Before we begin, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. A quick note, this story includes fictional and dramatized elements for storytelling purposes, but the lesson behind it is something many of us can reflect on. I laughed when I saw the zero. Not a polite chuckle, not the kind of nervous laugh people make when something awkward happens. This was a deep, uncontrollable laugh that shook my chest and echoed off the kitchen walls at 7:30 on a quiet Sunday morning. The sort of laugh that would make any neighbor who heard it wonder if the old man next door had finally lost his mind. Maybe I had. I sat at the kitchen table in my house on Desert Ridge Boulevard, staring at the glow of my laptop screen. A mug of coffee rested beside me, untouched, the steam long gone cold. Outside the window, the Arizona sun was slowly rising above the desert hills, turning the tall saguaros into golden silhouettes. It should have been a peaceful morning. Retirement had given me plenty of mornings like that, slow, quiet, predictable. But there was nothing peaceful about what I was looking at. My bank account balance looked like a disaster scene. Checking account, $1,732.14. Previous balance, $6,800. Savings, account $0. Previous balance, $220,000. I blinked once, then again. Maybe my eyes were still adjusting to the light. Maybe the system had glitched. Technology does strange things sometimes. I rubbed my face closed. The laptop waited a few seconds and opened it again. The numbers didn't change. Zero was still zero. That was the moment the laughter escaped me. Because what exactly are you supposed to do when your life savings disappears overnight? When you spent 3 decades working as a bank manager, teaching customers how to protect themselves from scams, and then you wake up one morning to realize you've become the victim. You either cry or you laugh. I chose laughter. My hands were steady as I clicked open the transaction history, which surprised me. You would think a man who had just been robbed blind might tremble a little. 3 large withdrawals appeared on the screen from my savings account. 1 more from checking. October 24th, 2024, 9:47 a.m., $90,000 transferred to Hannah Walker account, ending 3782. October 24th, 2024, 2:18 p.m., $85,000 transferred to BH Investment LLC. October 25th, 2024, 11:03 a.m., $45,000 Mesparmis wire transfer to Luxury Weddings AZ. October 26th, 2024, 3:42 p.m., $500 ATM withdrawal, Scottsdale Fashion Square. Total $225. Hannah Walker, my daughter. I stared at her name on the screen longer than I should have. 32 years old, marketing coordinator in Scottsdale. Drives a leased Honda she can barely afford. Calls me twice a month if she remembers. 3 times if she needs something. And apparently sometime over the last 72 hours, she had cleaned out nearly every dollar I had. The phone rang. I looked down at the screen. Hannah Walker. For a moment I considered letting it ring. I imagined ignoring it, letting it roll into voicemail, pretending I hadn't yet seen the numbers glowing on my laptop screen. Pretending I was still the confused old man she probably believed me to be. But confusion was never my problem. I had spent 30 years in banking. I recognized fraud when I saw it. I answered the call. Dad. Her voice sounded bright, cheerful, almost excited. I have amazing news. I didn't respond. Kyle and I are getting married this Saturday. Can you believe it? She continued, practically bubbling with excitement. We didn't want to wait forever, so we decided to just go for it. And guess what, Dad? We bought a house. My grip tightened around the phone. A house, I repeated slowly. Yes, it's perfect. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a pool in the backyard. You're going to love it. What's the address? I asked calmly. Too calmly. 2943 Canyon View Circle, she said. In Tempe. It's close to everything. And we got an incredible deal. The words hit me like a hammer. 2,943 Canyon View Circle, my rental property. The house I had owned for 9 years. The one that generated $3,200 a month in rent. The house I had carefully maintained because it was supposed to support my retirement, and now the savings account meant to back it up was sitting at zero. "Hannah," I said slowly, "that's my house." There was a pause on the line. Then she laughed. Light, casual, completely unbothered. "I know, Dad. That's the best part. I used the power of attorney you signed. Remember, you said I could handle your finances if you were ever sick or couldn't manage things yourself." My stomach turned cold. "So I sold the house," she continued happily, "and we used the money for the down payment. Isn't that perfect? It stays in the family. Power of attorney." I didn't remember signing any power of attorney, and I would have remembered. I spent decades reviewing legal documents. I knew exactly what a POA looked like. I knew the authority it granted. And there was absolutely no situation where I would willingly hand that kind of power to anyone, especially not my daughter. "Hannah," I said quietly, "I never signed a power of attorney." Silence. A longer pause this time. "Yes, you did," she replied. "In September, when you were in the hospital with pneumonia, I brought you the paperwork, insurance forms. Remember? You signed everything. September, the hospital. A fever of 104 degrees. 3 miserable days at Banner Desert Medical Center. I could barely lift my head off the pillow. And Hannah had visited. She had brought papers. I closed my eyes slowly. "Hannah," I said, "where did the money from my savings account go?" "What do you mean?" "The $220,000. Another pause. "Where is it? I already told you," she replied. "The house, the wedding, Dad. Are you feeling okay?" "You sound confused." Confused. She thought I was confused. Or maybe she needed me to be. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "I'll call you later." "Wait, Dad." I hung up. The kitchen fell silent again, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the laptop screen. $0. My thoughts drifted to Catherine, my wife. 34 years ago, she had sat at this same table, holding a tiny newborn girl wrapped in a hospital blanket. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me. "She's perfect," Catherine whispered. "Stephen, she's absolutely perfect." And she was. Hannah had always been brilliant, funny, stubborn. She had Catherine's eyes and Catherine's smile. Catherine died 3 years ago. February 14th, 2021, a car accident on Interstate 10 just outside Phoenix. The kind of random tragedy that arrives without warning and tears your life apart in seconds. Before she died, she squeezed my hand and made me promise something. "Take care of our girl." "I will," I told her. But sitting in that kitchen now, staring at my empty bank account, I realized something terrible. Sometimes the hardest person to protect someone from is themselves. I looked again at the transaction history. Hannah Walker. And once more, the laughter returned. "My daughter just stole $250,000 from me," I said out loud to the empty room. "And I'm sitting here laughing." My eyes drifted to the photograph of Catherine resting on the kitchen counter. She was smiling in that picture, warm, hopeful, always believing the best about people, even when they didn't deserve it. "Catherine," I whispered softly, "if you're watching, I'm sorry." My throat tightened. I failed. I closed the laptop. Outside, the desert morning stretched quietly beneath the rising sun, and inside the house I sat alone with a cold cup of coffee, and the echo of my own hollow laughter. 45 minutes later, I was still standing at the kitchen window, staring out across the desert. The saguaros stood perfectly still in the early morning light, their long arms lifted toward the sky, as if they were asking the same question echoing inside my head. How did I miss this? I'm not supposed to miss things like this. For 30 years, I was the person people trusted when something about their money didn't feel right. Stephen Walker, branch manager at Desert Valley Bank in Gilbert, the man who could spot a forged signature before a client even finished explaining their story. The one who noticed when a document looked wrong, when a transfer felt suspicious, when a so-called helpful relative suddenly appeared, asking an elderly parent to sign unfamiliar paperwork. I had stopped more scams than I could count. Fake power of attorney documents, pressure tactics, emotional manipulation, the classic line I'd heard 100 times. "Just sign here, Mom. It's easier if we handle this now." I knew every trick. I had built my entire career around recognizing them. And yet, somehow, I had missed the biggest one of all. Now, I was the cautionary example. The case study someone like me would have used in a seminar. I turned away from the window and looked around the kitchen. The silence inside the house felt heavy. Too heavy. It had been that way for 3 years, ever since Catherine died. This house, 4821 Desert Ridge Boulevard, had belonged to her family long before it ever belonged to me. Catherine inherited it from her parents when they passed away. She placed it into a trust, carefully organized the paperwork, and made sure everything was protected. Our safety net, she always called it. No matter what happened, we would always have this place. Catherine had always been the one who understood legal matters best. I handled numbers, investments, and financial planning. She handled everything else, documents, structures, protections. She was smarter than she ever gave herself credit for. We were married in 1990. 34 years. Catherine was 24 when I met her fresh out of college with a teaching degree and a smile that made every room feel warmer. I was 26, standing nervously in a borrowed suit from my father and holding a ring I had saved 6 months to buy. 2 years later, Hannah was born, our only child. The delivery had complications, and the doctors gently told us there probably wouldn't be another pregnancy. We didn't care. Hannah was enough, more than enough. At least that's what we believed. Catherine died on Valentine's Day in 2021, a car accident on Interstate 10 just outside Phoenix. She had been driving home from a teacher's conference in Tucson. A semi-truck driver fell asleep behind the wheel and drifted into her lane. They told me she didn't suffer, that it happened instantly. I've never decided whether that makes it easier or harder to accept. After Catherine was gone, I buried myself in work. But grief has a way of dulling even the sharpest mind. I was 56, exhausted and slowly losing focus. By 2022, I retired 2 years earlier than planned. The bank held a small ceremony. They gave me a gold watch and a plaque praising my dedicated service. I put both of them in a drawer the day I got home. I never looked at them again. I thought retirement would give me time to heal, time to process the loss, time to figure out how to exist without the woman who had been beside me for more than half my life. Instead, the house just grew quieter, lonelier. Hannah called at first, once a week, sometimes twice, but she had her own life to live. She worked as a marketing coordinator at a firm in Scottsdale, earning around $65,000 a year, while paying nearly $1,600 a month for a small apartment. She was busy, social, independent. I didn't want to become the clingy father who called too often, so I gave her space, maybe too much. I began volunteering at the Phoenix Public Library, teaching financial literacy classes to senior citizens. Ironic when I think about it now. I spent my afternoons helping strangers recognize scams, teaching them how to avoid the exact situation I had somehow walked straight into. Still, it kept me occupied. It kept my mind active. Or so I believed. The rental house at 294 Three Canyon View Circle in Tempe was supposed to be my backup plan. I purchased it in 2015 for $340,000 just before the market surged. Now the property was worth over $500,000. David and Lisa Robinson had been renting the place since 2021. They were ideal tenants, quiet, respectful, always paid rent on time. Their $3,200 monthly payment covered the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and still left me with extra income. Between the rental property and my savings account, retirement had felt safe, stable, secure, at least until yesterday. I walked back to the kitchen table and reopened the laptop. The numbers stared back at me exactly as before. $1,732.14 in checking, $0 in savings. I opened the transaction list again, even though I already knew every line by heart. Hannah Walker, B.H. Investment, LLC. Luxury Weddings, A.Z. My daughter. My intelligent, stubborn, beautiful daughter. The girl I taught to ride a bicycle on this very street. The teenager who sobbed on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young woman who stood beside me at Catherine's funeral, gripping my hand so tightly I could feel her fingers trembling. "I'll take care of you, Dad," she whispered that day. "I promise." And I believed her, every single word. I closed my eyes. In my memory, I saw Catherine again, not the hospital version of her, but the younger woman sitting at this table 32 years ago, holding our newborn daughter in her arms. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "She's perfect," Steve and Catherine said softly. "She's absolutely perfect." I'm sorry, I murmured into the empty kitchen. So sorry. When I opened my eyes again, the laptop screen was still glowing. I had spent 30 years teaching people how to recognize fraud, how to guard their finances, how to notice the warning signs. And yet I had missed every single one, because the person responsible wasn't a stranger. It was my daughter, and I had loved her too much to imagine she could ever do something like this. Slowly, I picked up my phone. My fingers moved almost automatically as I typed a search into the browser. Elder Financial Abuse Attorney, Phoenix, Arizona. Several results appeared. The first listing belonged to James Maxwell Law Firm, 5-star reviews, specializing in elder financial abuse fraud cases, estate disputes. I stared at the phone number for a long time, because I knew what this call meant. Once I dialed it, there would be no turning back, no pretending this was a misunderstanding, no convincing myself Hannah would eventually correct everything on her own. This was the moment I admitted the truth. My daughter had stolen from me. And if I didn't act now, she would destroy both our lives. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before a receptionist answered. James Maxwell Law Firm. How may I assist you today? I inhaled slowly. My name is Stephen Walker, I said. I need help. My voice faltered just slightly. My daughter stole from me. The receptionist told me someone would return my call within the hour. I ended the call and glanced at the clock on the microwave. 9 o'clock. In 3 hours, I was supposed to be standing inside a small classroom at the Phoenix Public Library explaining to a group of retirees how to recognize financial fraud. I wasn't going. The thought felt almost ironic. I set the phone on the kitchen table and sat there for a while, staring at nothing. The house felt unusually quiet. It had been quiet ever since Catherine passed away, but today the silence carried a different weight, as if the walls themselves knew something had broken. Without thinking much about it, I picked up my phone again and opened the Photos app. My thumb moved slowly across the screen as I scrolled through years of memories. Catherine standing near the edge of the Grand Canyon, her hair blowing wildly in the wind. Hannah in a graduation gown, smiling brightly beneath a blue desert sky. A photograph of a brilliant orange sunset stretching across the Arizona desert. Then my scrolling stopped. A picture from the summer of 1999 appeared on the screen. Hannah was 8 years old in that photo, sitting right here at this same kitchen table. Crayons were scattered across the surface, and she was holding up a sheet of bright yellow construction paper with both hands. Her smile showed the missing front tooth she had lost that spring. My daddy the hero. I remembered that afternoon perfectly. It was the summer of 1999 in Scottsdale, the kind of scorching Arizona afternoon when the air felt thick enough to drink. I had just returned home from the bank still wearing my suit jacket, even though sweat clung to the back of my shirt. Hannah was sitting at the kitchen table, leaning over a drawing. Catherine stood by the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce, softly humming along to music playing on the radio. Daddy, look, Hannah called, lifting her drawing high in the air. I walked closer and looked down at the picture. A stick figure wearing a cape with a large letter W drawn proudly across his chest. The little figure was flying through the sky while holding the hand of a much smaller stick figure beside him. You're a Superman, Hannah announced proudly, and I'm your helper. Catherine laughed from the stove. Your daughter thinks you're a superhero. Try not to let that inflate your ego. I knelt down beside Hannah and loosened my tie. This is incredible, I told her seriously. Do you mind if I keep it? Her expression turned thoughtful for a moment before she nodded firmly. You have to keep it, she said, because you protect me from bad guys. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I'll always protect you, sweetheart, I promised. Promise, she asked. Promise. She smiled happily and returned to coloring her picture. Across the kitchen, Catherine caught my eye. Her smile was gentle, but there was something thoughtful behind it. A silent message I didn't fully understand at the time. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Back then, though, I believed I could keep that promise forever. I swiped to the next picture. June 2009, Hannah's high school graduation. The lawn of Desert Vista High School stretched behind us, filled with folding chairs and proud families taking photographs. Hannah stood between Catherine and me, wearing her cap and gown, her diploma clutched tightly in her hand. She looked older than I was ready for. Hannah's eyes were filled with tears. Thank you for everything, she said softly, her voice trembling. I know I wasn't always the easiest kid, but I love you both. I'm going to make you proud. I promise. I laughed gently and squeezed her shoulder. You already make us proud. I mean it, Dad. Catherine leaned over and kissed the top of Hannah's head. "You've always made us proud, sweetheart." The photo had been taken just seconds later, the three of us standing close together, smiling toward the camera. Hannah stood in the middle, holding both of our hands. She looked so happy in that moment. I wondered when that happiness began to fade. I moved to the next image and my chest tightened. February 14th, 2021. Not a photo. A memory. Banner Desert Medical Center. The ICU room glowed beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Machines emitted steady beeping sounds, while the air carried the sharp scent of antiseptic. Catherine lay in the hospital bed, with her eyes closed, her expression calm and peaceful. But she wasn't sleeping. The doctors had already told me. The accident on Interstate 10 had been too severe. Catherine had already passed away before they brought her into the hospital. The machines were only running long enough for me to say goodbye. Hannah stood beside me, gripping my arm tightly. She was 29 years old, but in that moment, she looked like a frightened child. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I told her quietly. "I should have visited more," Hannah said through her tears. "I should have called more often. I should have Hannah." She looked at me sobbing. "This isn't your fault." She wrapped her arms around me and we stood together in that cold hospital room while the machines continued their indifferent rhythm. "I'm going to take care of you," Hannah whispered through her tears. "Just like you took care of Mom and me. I'll always be there for you, Dad. I swear." I held her tighter, because I believed her. I closed the photo app and lowered the phone. 3 memories, 3 promises. "You protect me from bad guys. I'm going to make you proud. I'll take care of you, Dad." My vision blurred as I stared down at the screen. What had happened to that little girl who once believed I was Superman? What had happened to the young woman who cried at her graduation and promised to make us proud? What had happened to the daughter who stood beside me in a hospital room and promised she would take care of me? When had she become someone capable of taking everything I had? For years that childhood drawing hung on the wall in my office at the bank. Customers often asked about it. "That's my daughter's artwork," I would tell them proudly. "She thinks I'm Superman," and I always felt proud saying it. After Catherine died, I took the drawing home and placed it in a frame beside Hannah's graduation photo on my dresser. "You're my hero." Those words used to mean everything. Now they felt like something from another lifetime. I wasn't anyone's hero anymore, just a 58-year-old man sitting alone in a quiet kitchen after being robbed by the person he loved most. I stared at the image on my phone again, 8-year-old Hannah smiling brightly as she held up her drawing. My daddy the hero. I closed my eyes slowly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I whispered into the empty kitchen. "I'm so sorry." I wasn't even sure who I was apologizing to anymore. Hannah, Catherine, or myself. Maybe all 3. Suddenly my phone rang. The sound startled me out of the silence. I glanced down at the screen. "James Maxwell Law Firm." I answered immediately. "Mr. Walker," a man's voice said. "This is James Maxwell. Would you be able to come to my office today at 2 o'clock? I looked up at the clock on the wall. 9:15. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'll be there." I remained seated at the kitchen table for a few moments after the call ended, my phone still resting in my hand. 2 o'clock. James Maxwell's office. I had almost 5 hours before that meeting. For a moment, I just stared at the wall calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Sunday morning. According to the neat blue ink written there weeks earlier, I was supposed to be at the Phoenix Public Library today. I had volunteered there every other Sunday for the past 2 years, teaching financial literacy classes for seniors. Today's topic was written clearly in my own handwriting: how to spot elder financial abuse. Under different circumstances, the irony might have been amusing. Instead, it felt like a punch to the chest. I grabbed my car keys from the counter and headed outside. By 10 o'clock, I was pulling into the library parking lot. Sunday mornings were always quiet there. A few early readers wandered through the main entrance, and a couple of parents guided their children toward the bright carpeted area of the kids' section. The building carried the familiar smell of old paper and polished wood. I walked down the hallway toward the community room, where my class was usually held. The door creaked softly as I opened it. The room was empty, chairs neatly arranged in rows facing the projector screen. I began setting up automatically. Laptop on the table, projector plugged in. Handouts placed in neat stacks near the entrance. The first slide appeared on the screen. Elder financial abuse, warning signs. I stared at the words longer than I should have. My chest tightened. The seniors who attended my class would begin arriving around 11:30. That gave me nearly an hour and a half to collect myself. I sank into one of the empty chairs and closed my eyes. But the moment I did, my thoughts drifted back to Hannah. The year Catherine died. During those first few months after the accident, Hannah had tried to be present. She called frequently, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. On weekends, she would drive over to the house and help me sort through Catherine's belongings. We spent long afternoons sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with clothing books and the small ceramic birds Catherine had collected over the years. "You don't have to handle this alone, Dad," Hannah told me once as she folded one of Catherine's sweaters. "I'm here." And she was. At least for a while. Then came 2022, the year I retired. Gradually, the phone calls began to fade. Once a week, maybe. Hannah often sounded rushed when we spoke. She was working long hours as a marketing coordinator at a firm in Scottsdale. Her salary was decent, around $65,000 a year, but she was constantly stressed about bills. "I'm sorry I haven't called more," she said during one conversation. "Work has been crazy." "I understand," I replied. "You have your own life," and I meant that. The last thing I wanted was to become the needy father who made his daughter feel guilty for living independently. So I didn't push. I waited. The year she moved farther away. In March, Hannah signed a lease on a small apartment in Scottsdale. 1 bedroom, rent $1,650 a month. It was only 15 miles from my house, but emotionally it might as well have been another state. "It's closer to work," she explained when she told me about it. "And the neighborhood is really nice." "That sounds great," I said. "I'm happy for you." After that, the calls became even rarer, once a month, sometimes less. Occasionally she answered when I called. Often she didn't. "Can't talk right now. At work. I'll call you back." She almost never did. The house became unbearably quiet. Most evenings I ate dinner alone in front of the television, microwave meals, canned soup, whatever required the least effort. Catherine's photograph rested on the mantel across from the couch, smiling at me from another lifetime. Sometimes I talked to that photograph. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," I'd say softly. "I don't know why she won't call." Catherine's smile never changed. My friend Frank Donovan stopped by occasionally. Frank and I had worked together at the bank for years before he retired. Once or twice a month he'd come over and we'd sit on the patio with a couple of beers watching the desert sunset. We talked about baseball, the Diamondbacks, weather, anything except the real problem. "You should call Hannah," Frank suggested one evening in June. "I do call," I replied. "She doesn't answer." "Then go see her. Just show up at her apartment." I shook my head. "I'm not ambushing my own daughter." Frank shrugged. "Suit yourself," he said. "But sitting here waiting isn't helping either." He was right, but I still didn't listen. Then came early 2024, the year everything began to change. By spring, Hannah and I barely communicated. Occasionally, she sent a short text message. "Happy birthday, Dad." "Thanks, sweetheart. Love you." No phone call, no visit. I convinced myself it was normal. She was 32 years old. She had a career, responsibilities, her own struggles. I told myself I shouldn't expect her to revolve her life around me, but the loneliness was crushing. Then in July, she called unexpectedly, the first real phone conversation we'd had in weeks. "Hey, Dad," she said casually. "Quick question." Just hearing her voice made me smile. "What's up? How much is your rental house worth? The one in Tempe?" I didn't hesitate. "Probably around $578,000, I answered. "Maybe a little more depending on the market." "Why, Kyle and I were just talking about real estate investments." "Kyle." "My boyfriend," she said quickly. "I'll tell you more later. I've got to run. Love you." The call ended before I could ask anything else. Looking back now, the warning signs were obvious. Who was Kyle? How long had they been together? Why was she suddenly asking about my property? But in that moment, none of those questions mattered. I was simply grateful that my daughter had called. I opened my eyes and looked around the empty community room. Loneliness had blinded me. I hadn't noticed the distance growing between us. Or maybe she hadn't been drifting away at all. Maybe she had been moving closer for a different reason. I had missed every warning sign. At 11:30, the seniors began arriving. Mrs. Patterson took her usual seat in the front row. Mr. Kim sat near the back, carefully opening the small notebook he always carried. "Good morning, Steve and Mrs." Patterson called with a friendly wave. "Ready to teach us how not to get scammed today?" I forced a polite smile. "Always." The class lasted 45 minutes. I delivered the presentation almost automatically. I explained the typical red flags of financial abuse. unusual transfers, sudden requests for signatures, relatives pressuring older family members to grant financial control. I emphasize the importance of reading every document carefully. Never sign anything you don't fully understand, even if the person asking is family, especially if the person asking is family. At the end, I closed my presentation and looked out across the room. Any questions, Mrs.? Patterson slowly raised her hand. What if the person trying to take your money, she asked gently, is someone you love, someone you trust completely? I looked at her for several long seconds before answering. Then you're facing the most difficult situation of all, I said quietly, because you won't recognize it until it's already too late. The room became very still. I closed my laptop. Take care of yourselves, I told them. The class ended. One by one, the seniors thanked me and left the room. Mrs. Patterson lingered near the doorway. Stephen, she said softly. Are you all right? I'm fine, I replied. Just tired. She studied my face for a moment, but eventually nodded and walked away. I packed my laptop and gathered the handouts. By the time I reached the parking lot, it was already 1:15. The drive home was silent. When I stepped inside the house again, the familiar quiet greeted me. I stopped in the living room and looked at Catherine's photograph. I was so lonely, I whispered. I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry. Upstairs, I changed into my navy blue suit, the one I used to wear for serious meetings at the bank. Standing in front of the mirror, I studied my reflection. 58 years old, tired, but not defeated. I gathered my laptop, my phone, and the folder of bank statements I had printed earlier that morning. At exactly 1:45, I walked out the front door. Enough was enough. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to become Stephen Walker again. James Maxwell's office occupied the third floor of a sleek glass building on Camelback Road. The space was modern and deliberate floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Phoenix traffic leather chairs arranged neatly around a polished conference table, and a desk made of dark walnut that seemed built to project authority. I sat across from him, with a folder of printed bank statements resting in my lap. For nearly 20 minutes, I had explained everything slowly, carefully. The withdrawals, the suspicious transfers, the power of attorney I had no memory of signing, the sudden disappearance of my rental property. Maxwell had listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. Now he leaned back slightly in his chair and studied me with calm, analytical eyes. Tell me about your daughter's boyfriend, he said. When did you first meet him? I took a slow breath. April, I answered. This year. Maxwell nodded once. Walk me through that meeting. My mind returned to that evening. April the 2024. My house. It had been a Saturday. That morning, Hannah had called unexpectedly, the first time I'd heard her voice in weeks. Dad, can I bring someone to dinner tonight? She asked. Of course, I said immediately. I want you to meet Kyle, she continued. I think you're really going to like him. I remember feeling oddly excited. Hannah rarely invited anyone into her life, especially not to meet me. So I said yes without hesitation. They arrived around 6 o'clock. Hannah looked happy, almost glowing, and the man standing beside her looked like he had stepped out of a magazine advertisement. He was tall, maybe 6'1", dark hair styled neatly. His suit was charcoal gray and clearly expensive. When he reached out to shake my hand, the watch on his wrist caught the light from the hallway. Mr. Walker, he said with an easy smile. It's an honor to finally meet you. Hannah's told me a lot about you. His handshake was firm and confident. Call me Stephen, I replied. Come on in. We moved into the living room while Hannah brought out drinks from the kitchen. Kyle sat comfortably on the couch as if he'd already been there a dozen times. So I asked after a moment. Hannah tells me, you work in real estate. That's right, he said smoothly. Real estate investment. I run a family business, Reed Properties LLC. We specialize in commercial properties, office buildings, retail spaces, that sort of thing. How long have you been doing that? About 10 years, he replied without hesitation. My parents started the company originally, but I've been running the operations for the past few years. He spoke confidently. Too confidently. He mentioned development projects in Scottsdale and Paradise Valley, dropped the names of investors and construction groups, discussed cap rates, return on investment, and market expansion strategies. It sounded impressive, but something about it felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain exactly what bothered me. Maybe it was the tone in his voice, smooth, polished, like a salesman delivering a perfect pitch rather than an investor discussing real work. Or maybe it was the watch. I'd spent 3 decades working in banking. I had seen enough luxury watches to recognize a genuine Tag Heuer. The one on Kyle's wrist wasn't authentic. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. Hannah looked so happy sitting beside him. Maxwell tapped his pen against the notebook. What was your overall impression of him? On the surface, I said, impressive. Well-dressed, articulate, confident. I paused, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. Maxwell leaned forward slightly. Explain. He talked too much, I said. Everything sounded perfect, too perfect, like he was pitching a business deal instead of having a normal conversation. Maxwell nodded thoughtfully. What happened after that meeting July? I said. Hannah invited me to dinner with his parents. The memory returned clearly. July 2024. The Arrogant Butcher restaurant in downtown Phoenix. It was a busy Friday night. The place was crowded and loud, the smell of grilled steak filling the air. When Hannah and I arrived, Kyle's parents were already seated at a table near the back. Linda Reed stood up immediately. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, elegant, confident, warm. Stephen, it's wonderful to finally meet you, she said as she shook my hand. Hannah speaks so highly of you. Beside her sat Richard Reed, early 60s gray hair, reserved demeanor. He shook my hand politely and commented briefly about the summer heat before settling back in his chair. Dinner began with small talk. Linda did most of the talking. Reed Properties has been our family business for over 20 years, she explained. Richard and I started it with nothing. Kyle has really taken things to another level. She smiled proudly toward her son. We're extremely happy Kyle found Hannah. Hannah squeezed Kyle's hand across the table. Linda continued. In fact, we've already decided to help them get started. How so? I asked. We're planning to give them $250,000 as a wedding gift. I nearly choked on my drink. That's very generous. Family takes care of family, Linda said simply. Richard talked a bit about golf courses he'd like to visit. Linda mentioned their plans to retire in Sedona within the next few years. Kyle and Hannah sat side by side smiling and holding hands like a perfectly happy couple. At the end of the evening, I walked out of that restaurant thinking they seemed like a pleasant family, successful, supportive. I was wrong. Maxwell's voice brought me back to the present. Did anything strike you as suspicious that night? Not really, I admitted. They seemed legitimate, wealthy, generous. I didn't see any obvious warning signs. And the engagement, Maxwell asked. August. I remembered Hannah's voice on the phone that day, excited, breathless. Dad, he proposed. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I told her. I'm so happy for you. And I meant it. But there was a small voice inside my head, whispering doubt. They had only known each other 4 months, I explained to Maxwell. It felt rushed. But I didn't want to become the father who disapproved of her relationship. I paused. I didn't want to push her away. So I said nothing. I congratulated her. I smiled. Maxwell slowly set his pen down on the desk and looked directly at me. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, everything you've described raises several red flags. The rapid relationship timeline, he continued, the expensive appearance, the parents promising a $250,000 wedding gift. He paused for a moment. I believe we need to investigate this man further. How, I asked? I'm going to hire a private investigator, Maxwell replied. One of the best in Phoenix. His name is Michael Brooks. He specializes in financial fraud cases. Maxwell leaned back again. He'll conduct a full background investigation on Kyle Reed, financial history, criminal records, business registrations. Everything we can legally obtain. I felt a slow knot tighten in my stomach. Do it, I said quietly. Maxwell lowered his gaze to the legal pad in front of him and wrote several quick notes. After a moment, he looked back up. Let's go through the financial timeline, he said calmly. When was the first time you gave Hannah money connected to this situation? I leaned back slightly and closed my eyes, searching through the past few months. June, I said slowly. That's when it started. Maxwell nodded. Tell me what happened. June 2024. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because the sun was still high and the desert air was thick with heat. I had been standing in the backyard watering the desert plants Catherine used to take such pride in her agave, the small cactus garden she had arranged carefully near the fence. My phone rang. Hannah. I smiled when I saw her name and answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart. Dad, she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. I have an incredible opportunity. What kind of opportunity? I want to open a children's boutique in Scottsdale. I paused, letting the words settle. A boutique? Yes. A high-end shop. Designer kids' clothing, toys, accessories, all that. Kyle's been helping me build a business plan. His parents think it's a fantastic idea. Something in my chest tightened slightly. Hannah had never mentioned wanting to start a business before. That sounds like a pretty big project, I said carefully. I know, but it could really work, Dad, she insisted. I've researched the market. There's a real demand for it. I just need someone to invest. I had a feeling I knew where the conversation was going. How much are you asking for? There was a brief pause. $50,000. For a second, I nearly dropped the garden hose. Hannah, that's a lot of money. I know it is, she said quickly. But think of it as an investment. I'll pay you back with interest. Kyle says we could start seeing profits within a year, Kyle says. That phrase stuck with me. I don't know, I said slowly. Let me think about it. Dad. Her tone softened. You remember what Mom used to say? She always told me to follow my dreams. She believed in me. There it was. The one argument that was impossible to ignore. Catherine had always encouraged Hannah to be brave to chase the things that mattered to her. Of course I believe in you, I said quietly. Then please help me, Hannah said. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I should have said no. I should have asked questions. But instead I heard myself say something else. All right, send me the business plan. I'll look it over. Thank you, Dad, she said immediately. Thank you so much. I love you. I love you too. A week later, July 8th, 2024, the business plan arrived in my email inbox. It was 15 pages long, professional formatting, charts, revenue projections, expense breakdowns, a market analysis of boutique retail in Scottsdale. On the surface, it looked convincing. But during my years at the bank, I had learned a simple truth with a computer. A template and a little patience, anyone could make a document look legitimate. I should have taken it to a lawyer. I should have verified the information. I should have done my due diligence, but I didn't. Because I wanted to believe my daughter. A week after sending the document, Hannah came by the house with printed paperwork. Just some final documents, she explained cheerfully. She placed 2 sets of papers on the table. An investor agreement, an LLC operating agreement, both connected to a company called Little Stars Boutique LLC. Just sign here, she said, pointing at the bottom of the pages. I picked up the first document and began reading carefully. Dad? Her voice carried a slight edge. I looked up. She was standing near the kitchen window, arms crossed tightly. Do you trust me or not? She asked. Of course I trust you. Then sign the papers, she said. Kyle's parents are investing too. This is a real opportunity. But if you don't believe in me, just say so. Her words hit harder than they should have. I didn't want to disappoint her. I signed the documents. And later that afternoon, I wired $50,000 to a business account listed under Little Stars Boutique LLC. Maxwell tapped his pen against the desk. Did you ever see the store? He asked. No, I said quietly. Not until last month. October 2024. For weeks I had been asking Hannah about the boutique. When will it open? Where exactly is the location? Can I stop by and see it? Every time I asked, she gave the same answer. We're still renovating, Dad. I'll show you when it's finished. Eventually, my patience ran out. One Sunday afternoon, I drove to the address she had mentioned during one of our earlier conversations. 8663 East Scottsdale Road. When I arrived, I realized something was very wrong. The property wasn't a store. It wasn't even under construction. It was an empty lot, just dirt weeds and a rusted chain-link fence. No building, no renovation, nothing. I sat in my car for 20 minutes staring at that empty piece of land. $50,000. Gone. I looked back at Maxwell. She lied, I said quietly. The boutique never existed. Maxwell nodded slowly. Now tell me about the power of attorney, he said. When did that happen? My jaw tightened. September, I replied, when I got sick. September 14th through September 18th, 2024. It started with a cough. Then came the fever. By the second day, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. When the thermometer read 104.3, I finally called 911. The diagnosis was pneumonia. They admitted me to Banner Desert Medical Center and started antibiotics immediately. I stayed there for 3 days. Hannah visited on the second day. September 16th. I was still weak and disoriented when she arrived. Dad, I brought some paperwork, she said, pulling a folder from her bag. What kind of paperwork? Just routine stuff. Insurance forms, medical consent. In case something happens while you're here. The pages blurred together in front of my eyes. What is this exactly? Just medical paperwork, she said gently. Sign here, and here, and here. I signed, 4 signatures. I didn't read a single page. Perfect, Hannah said, as she slipped the papers back into her folder. I'll handle everything, Dad. Don't worry. Then she left. I didn't think about those documents again. Not until last week. Not until I opened my bank statements and saw the withdrawals. I looked at Maxwell. It wasn't medical paperwork, I said. It was a financial power of attorney. It gave her full authority over my bank accounts and real estate. Maxwell frowned. And the notary Margaret Phillips, I said. That's the name on the document. But her notary license expired August 30th, and according to her daughter, she was visiting family in Sacramento on September 16th. Maxwell scribbled rapidly. So, the notarization was forged. Yes. And you had no idea what you were signing. I was barely conscious, I said quietly. I trusted her. The room fell silent. Maxwell finally placed his pen down. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, your daughter defrauded you twice. The fake boutique investment, $50,000. Then the fraudulent power of attorney used to transfer another $225,000. He paused. And she attempted to sell your rental property valued at approximately $578,000. I felt nauseous. I was a fool, I whispered. No, Maxwell said firmly. You were a father who trusted his daughter. That's not foolish. That's human. I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure I deserved that kindness. Maxwell straightened in his chair. Here's what we're gonna do, he said. First, we freeze the sale of your rental property immediately. He continued calmly. I'll contact the title company handling the transaction, Secure Title LLC. Then we'll file a formal fraud report with the Gilbert Police Department. Criminal charges, I asked quietly. Yes. Against Hannah and Kyle, Maxwell replied. I looked up sharply. Both of them. This wasn't accidental, he said. It was coordinated. Kyle is almost certainly involved. I nodded slowly. What happens next? Michael Brooks, the investigator I mentioned earlier, will begin a full background check on Kyle Reed. We should have preliminary results within 48 hours. All right. Maxwell stood and extended his hand across the desk. Go home, Mr. Walker, he said gently. Try to get some rest. I'll call you the moment we have new information. I stepped out of James Maxwell's office at 3:30 that afternoon. The moment the building doors closed behind me, the Phoenix heat wrapped around my body like a heavy blanket. October in Arizona was supposed to be cooler, but the sun still pressed down hard on the pavement. I walked across the parking lot and climbed into my car. For a moment, I didn't start the engine. I simply sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. September. That was the month everything began to unravel. I started the car and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, turning south toward home. Traffic moved steadily along Camelback Road, but I barely noticed the other vehicles around me. All I could think about was how completely I had missed what was happening. September 8th, 2024. A Sunday evening, about 6 weeks earlier, Hannah had called me that afternoon. Dad, would you like to have dinner with me and Kyle tonight? She asked. Just the 3 of us. I agreed without hesitation. Of course I did. We met at True Food Kitchen in Scottsdale Quarter. When I arrived, they were already there sitting at a corner table. Hannah and Kyle were holding hands across the table when I approached. Hannah looked happy. Kyle looked perfectly relaxed, as though he belonged in every room he walked into. We ordered dinner and talked casually while we waited for the food. Most of the conversation was light work travel wedding ideas. Kyle eventually mentioned their plans. We're thinking about keeping the wedding small, he said casually. Just close family and a few friends, maybe 50 people. When are you planning it? I asked. October 28th, he replied. I raised an eyebrow. That's soon. Hannah smiled brightly. When you know, you know. Then Kyle leaned back in his chair, as if he were making ordinary conversation. Hannah mentioned you own a rental property, he said. In Tempe. Yes, I replied. Canyon View Circle. What's it worth these days? I shrugged slightly. About $578,000. He nodded thoughtfully. That's a solid investment. He took a sip of his drink. We've been thinking about getting into real estate ourselves. At the time, the conversation seemed harmless. I didn't question it, but now looking back, I realized something. That dinner hadn't been casual. It had been reconnaissance. September 14th, 2024. The illness started that Friday morning. At first, it was just a cough. Then came the fever. By Saturday evening, I felt exhausted, but I assumed it was just a seasonal infection. By Sunday morning, I could barely get out of bed. My fever climbed past 104 degrees. That's when I called 911. Paramedics transported me to Banner Desert Medical Center. The diagnosis came quickly: severe pneumonia. They admitted me immediately and started IV antibiotics. The first 2 days blurred together in a haze of fever and exhaustion. Machines beeped beside my bed, while nurses came in every few hours to check my temperature, blood pressure, oxygen levels. I remember fragments, bright hospital lights, the smell of disinfectant. But Hannah never visited. She didn't call either. September 16th, 2024, Monday afternoon. Hannah finally appeared. I was lying in the hospital bed, drifting in and out of sleep. The fever had broken that morning, but my head still felt heavy and unfocused. Dad? I opened my eyes slowly. Hannah stood beside the bed, holding a folder. "Hey, sweetheart," I muttered. "You came." "Of course I did," she said softly, pulling a chair closer. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I answered, "but better than yesterday." "Good." She opened the folder and began pulling out papers. "I brought some paperwork," she said. "Just routine hospital stuff. Insurance forms. Medical consent in case they need to run additional procedures." I blinked down at the pages she handed me. The words seemed to blur together. "What is all this?" I asked. "Standard hospital documents," she said quickly. "They need signatures for everything these days." She handed me a pen and pointed to several lines. "Just sign here, and here, and here, and here." 4 separate documents? I tried to focus on the first page, but my head felt heavy and slow. "Hannah? I can barely read right now." "It's okay," she said gently. "I've already looked through them. They're just consent forms. Nothing important." I believed her. I signed, once, twice, 3 times, 4. Not once did I read the words printed above my signature. September 22nd, 2024. I was discharged from the hospital on the 20th. Even at home, I still felt weak and exhausted. 2 days later, Sunday morning, I received an email from Hannah. "Subject: insurance documents. Please keep for records." 4 PDF attachments. I opened my laptop and glanced at the message. Then I closed it. I was still tired. My chest hurt when I breathed too deeply. The medication made my head foggy. If the documents were important, I assumed Hannah would explain them. So I deleted the email. I never opened those attachments. Now it was October 27th. I turned into my driveway at exactly 4 o'clock. The house looked the same as it always did. Quiet. Still. I sat in the car for several seconds, staring at the front door. That was when the realization fully settled in. Hannah had planned everything. The dinner on September 8th, when Kyle casually asked about my rental property. The hospital visit on September 16th, when I was too weak and disoriented to question anything. The email on September 22nd, when I was too exhausted to look closely at what she had sent. She had waited until I was at my weakest. And then she struck. The hospital visit had never been about checking on me. It had been about getting my signature. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly inside the house. The living room was dim. I hadn't opened the curtains in days. I walked toward the fireplace mantel and stopped. Catherine's photograph sat there in its silver frame. The picture had been taken on our anniversary 5 years before she died. She looked radiant, happy. I picked up the frame and held it carefully. "You always said Hannah was brilliant," I whispered. "You were so proud of her. Straight A's, scholarships. You used to tell everyone she could accomplish anything she set her mind to." My throat tightened as I stared at Catherine's smiling face. "I just wish I said quietly you'd warned me that someday she might use that intelligence against me." I was still holding Catherine's photograph when the phone rang. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet living room, pulling me out of my thoughts. I carefully set the silver frame back onto the mantel and reached for my phone. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something instinct maybe made me answer. "Hello, Stephen?" a woman's voice asked. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Yes, this is Rebecca. Rebecca Thompson, from Desert Valley." The name instantly triggered recognition. Desert Valley Bank. The branch where I had spent 25 years of my life working behind a desk, helping families manage their savings and investments. "Rebecca," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Hi, what's going on?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Stephen, I'm calling because I noticed some unusual activity on your accounts this morning," she said carefully. "Large withdrawals. I wanted to confirm that you authorized them." A cold weight settled in my chest. "What withdrawals?" I asked quietly. "I'm pulling up the records now," she said. I heard the sound of keyboard typing through the phone. "Just give me a moment." I moved to the couch and slowly sat down, pressing the phone tightly against my ear. Rebecca spoke again. "Okay, I have it." My heart was pounding. October the 24th, 9:47 in the morning, she read, "$90,000 transferred from your savings account to an account registered under the name Hannah Walker, account number ending in 3782. I closed my eyes. Rebecca continued. October 24th, 2:18 in the afternoon. $85,000 transferred from savings to an account listed as BH Investment LLC, BH Kyle Reed. My stomach twisted. And October 25th, 11:03 in the morning, she went on. A wire transfer of $45,000 to a company called Luxury Weddings AZ. The wedding. They had used my money to pay for their wedding. Rebecca paused briefly before continuing. And finally, October 26th at 3:42 in the afternoon. $5,100 withdrawn in cash from an ATM at Scottsdale Fashion Square. The debit card used was issued to Hannah Walker as an authorized user on your checking account. She stopped speaking. "Stephen," she said gently, "that's a total of $225,100 withdrawn in 72 hours. Did you authorize these transactions?" "No." My voice sounded distant, hollow. "I didn't." There was silence on the line for a moment. "Are you certain?" Rebecca asked. "Because according to the records, the transfers were made through your online banking account using your login credentials. And there's also a power of attorney on file authorizing Hannah Walker to act on your behalf." "The power of attorney isn't real," I interrupted. Another pause. "Rebecca, my daughter forged it. She tricked me into signing paperwork while I was in the hospital last month. I had pneumonia. I could barely stay awake. I had no idea what I was signing. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. It was sharper now. "Professional. Stephen, I'm freezing both of your accounts immediately," she said, checking in savings. "No additional transactions will be allowed. Thank you. I'm also flagging this case as suspected elder financial abuse. Our fraud department will begin an internal investigation." Elder financial abuse. I almost laughed. For 30 years, I had sat across desks from elderly clients warning them about that exact scenario, and now I had become one of them. "Rebecca," I said, slowly, "did Hannah try to sell my rental property?" I heard more typing. "Yes," she said after a moment. "There's a pending sale on record. Property address 2943 Canyon View Circle, Tempe. Buyers listed as Mark and David Patel. Sale price $578,000. Scheduled closing date November 5th. 2 weeks. Can you stop it?" I asked. "I'll contact the title company right away," she said. "Who's handling the escrow?" "Secure Title LLC," I replied. "The CEO is Charles Bennett." "I know Charles," Rebecca said immediately. "I'll call him directly and request an escrow freeze." "Thank you," I said quietly. My throat tightened. I should have seen this coming. Her voice softened. "Stephen, you're not the first person this has happened to," she said. "And unfortunately, you won't be the last. Family members are often the hardest to detect because trust makes us blind to warning signs. I spent 30 years in banking," I said bitterly. "I should have recognized it." "You were acting as a father who loved his daughter," Rebecca replied gently. "That's not the same thing." I didn't answer. "Listen," she continued. "You did the right thing by speaking up. Many victims stay silent. They're embarrassed or afraid of tearing their family apart, but you're taking action. That takes courage." I nodded slowly even though she couldn't see me. "I'll call you back once I've spoken with Charles," she said. "In the meantime, change your online banking password immediately, and make sure Hannah no longer has access to any of your accounts." "I will. I'm truly sorry this happened to you, Stephen." "Thank you, Rebecca." The call ended. Silence filled the house again. I stared down at my phone. $225,100. Gone. In 72 hours. October 24th, October 25th, October 26th, 3 days. She had drained my savings, emptied the rental income account, and even pulled cash from my checking account, all in a single weekend, right before the wedding. I slowly stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the desert sky was beginning to glow orange as the sun sank toward the horizon. Tomorrow was October 28th, Hannah's wedding day. She would walk down the aisle wearing a dress purchased with my money. She would exchange vows inside a venue booked with my money. She would celebrate with champagne flowers, photographers, and a reception hall all paid for with my money. The money I had spent 30 years saving. The money I intended to leave to her someday. But she hadn't been willing to wait. Instead, she took it while I was still alive, while I was weak, while I trusted her. My mind replayed the hospital room, Hannah standing beside my bed, holding those documents, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's okay, Dad. I already read everything. Just sign." And I had signed because I loved her, because I trusted her, because that's what fathers do. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. 58 years old, gray hair, tired eyes. A man who had spent 3 decades protecting other people's money and failed to protect his own. But I wasn't finished yet. Tomorrow Hannah would walk down the aisle. Tomorrow she would marry Kyle Reed with the money they stole from me. But that celebration wouldn't last long, because I was going to stop it. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone again. James Maxwell had given me his direct number earlier that afternoon. I dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Walker?" "It's done," I said. "The bank froze the accounts. They're opening an elder abuse investigation, and they're contacting the title company to stop the property sale." "Good," Maxwell replied calmly. "That's exactly what we needed." "What happens now?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, I'll file a formal report with the Gilbert Police Department," he said. "Detective Daniel Carter handles financial fraud cases. He'll likely want to interview you." "All right." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Walker," Maxwell said, his voice steady. "You're doing the right thing. I wasn't entirely sure I believed him, but I nodded anyway. I'll speak with you tomorrow," I said quietly. Then I ended the call. I stood in the middle of the living room, phone still in my hand, staring into the empty space around me. $225,100. Gone in 3 days, and tomorrow Hannah Walker planned to celebrate her wedding with the money she stole from me. But if I had anything left to say about it, that wedding wasn't going to go the way she expected. At exactly 5 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called Frank. "I need your help," I said the moment he answered. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I'm on my way," he replied. True to his word, Frank Donovan arrived at my house 20 minutes later. Frank had been my closest friend for more than 30 years. We'd spent decades working side by side at Desert Valley Bank. He handled commercial lending, while I managed branch operations. We'd both retired within months of each other. Frank understood numbers. More importantly, he understood fraud. And right now, I needed someone who understood both. He walked into the kitchen and immediately saw me sitting at the table. My laptop was open in front of me, and a yellow legal pad beside it was covered with messy notes and arrows pointing in every direction. "Stephen," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. Then I told him everything. The fake business investment, the forged power of attorney, the hospital visit, the withdrawals from my accounts, the attempted sale of my rental property, the wedding scheduled for tomorrow. Frank didn't interrupt once. He simply listened, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished speaking, he leaned back slowly in his chair and rubbed his forehead. "Jesus, Stephen." "I know." "Hannah did this?" he asked quietly. "You're Hannah." "Yes." "And that Kyle guy," Frank continued. "You think he's the one behind it?" "I think he's involved," I said. "But I need proof." Frank sat silently for a moment, staring at the legal pad on the table. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I'm going to stop her." "Stephen, she committed a crime." "Frank," I said, my voice hardening. "She thinks I'm old. She thinks I'm weak. She thinks she can take everything I've worked for, and I'll just sit here and accept it." Frank studied me carefully. "She's still your daughter." "I know," I said quietly, "but that doesn't erase what she's done." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "So, what's the plan?" I turned the notepad toward him. "I've already started." Frank leaned forward and read the list. Action plan, bank, accounts frozen, Rebecca Thompson, title company, freeze sale of rental property, $578,000. Escrow attorney, fraud complaint filed James Maxwell. Police, report elder. Financial abuse, Gilbert P.D. private investigator. Background check on Kyle Reed. Frank raised his eyebrows. You've been busy. I'm just getting started, I said. He looked up at me again. What do you need from me? Stay here, I said. In case I need backup or someone who can verify what's happening. Frank didn't hesitate. Done. I picked up my phone. First call, Charles Bennett. 6 p.m., secure title, LLC. I dialed the number Rebecca had given me earlier. The phone rang 3 times before a man answered. Secure title. This is Charles. Mr. Bennett, my name is Stephen Walker, I said. Rebecca Thompson from Desert Valley Bank suggested I call you. I need to stop a real estate transaction immediately. What property are we talking about? He asked. 2943 Canyon View Circle in Tempe. I heard the sound of a keyboard. Okay, he said after a moment. I see the file. Sale to Mark and David Patel. Closing scheduled for November 5th. Purchase price $578,000. What's the problem? My daughter is attempting to sell that property without my authorization, I said. She used a forged power of attorney. The line went quiet. Mr. Bennett, I continued. I have documentation showing financial fraud. My attorney is filing a complaint tonight, and I'm in the process of filing a police report. The power of attorney is fraudulent. The notary license listed on the document expired before the signing date, and the notary herself wasn't even in Arizona at the time. Do you have evidence, he asked? Yes, I said. Bank statements, copies of the POA, everything. I heard more typing. All right, Bennett finally said. I'm freezing the escrow immediately. That means the $578,000 will not be released until the matter is resolved. I'm also flagging the transaction as disputed. Relief washed through me. Thank you. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, he said. So am I. I ended the call and looked at Frank. One down. He nodded approvingly. What's next, police? 7 p.m., Gilbert Police Department. The station was quiet that Sunday evening. At the front desk, I explained that I needed to file a report for elder financial abuse. The officer directed me to a small interview room. About 10 minutes later, a detective entered. Mr. Walker, he said. Yes, I'm Detective Daniel Carter. I handle financial fraud cases. He sat across from me and opened a notebook. Tell me what happened. I explained everything from the beginning. The timeline, the forged documents, the bank withdrawals, the attempted property sale. Detective Carter listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification, but never interrupting. When I finished, he set down his pen. Mr. Walker, he said, this fits the pattern of elder financial abuse very clearly. Do you have documentation? I handed him the folder. Bank statements, email records, copies of the fraudulent power of attorney. He reviewed them carefully. This is excellent documentation, he said. Very organized. I worked in banking for 30 years. He nodded. I'm opening an official investigation, he said. We'll need to interview your daughter and her fiancé. How long will this take? I asked. He hesitated. Fraud cases move slowly. It could take weeks, possibly months. The wedding is tomorrow. He nodded. I understand. But legally, I can't stop a wedding. My authority only applies to financial crimes. What if they disappear? I asked. If they attempt to flee, we'll pursue warrants, he said. But right now, our priority is building the case. I clenched my jaw. All right. I'll contact you once we begin the next steps, Carter said. In the meantime, do not confront your daughter. Do not threaten her. Anything like that could complicate the investigation. Understood. We shook hands before I left the station. 8:30 p.m., Michael Brooks, private investigator. Back in my car, I called the number James Maxwell had given me earlier. A man answered immediately. Brooks Investigations. Mr. Brooks, my name is Stephen Walker. James Maxwell referred me. I need a background investigation. Who's the subject? Kyle Reed. 34 years old. Claims to be a real estate investor in Scottsdale. What information are you looking for? Everything I said. Criminal history, financial records, business registrations, past lawsuits, previous relationships. Anything you can find. That takes time. How long? 48 hours for a preliminary report. Possibly sooner. Start immediately. My rate is $150 per hour plus expenses. That's fine, I said. Send the contract. I'll sign tonight. You'll have it in 10 minutes. I ended the call. Frank was still waiting when I got home. How'd it go? He asked. The title company froze the property sale, I said. Police opened a fraud investigation, and a private investigator is digging into Kyle Reed. Frank stood up and nodded. You handled that well, Stephen. I haven't done anything yet. You stood up and fought back, he said. That's more than most people manage. He picked up his jacket. You going to be okay tonight? I think so. Call me if you need anything. I will. Good night, Stephen. Good night, Frank. After he left the house, fell silent again. I walked slowly toward the mantel and picked up Catherine's photograph. I couldn't protect you, I whispered softly. But I can protect myself. I paused, staring into her smiling face. And maybe I said quietly somehow, I can still protect Hannah. From herself. I placed the frame back on the mantel and glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. Tomorrow was the wedding. Hannah believed she had won. She believed she had taken everything and escaped the consequences. She had no idea what was coming. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the same thoughts returned. Hannah standing beside my hospital bed, Kyle smiling across that dinner table, the numbers on my bank statement draining away like water through a cracked pipe. By the time the sun rose over Phoenix, I had already given up on sleep. At 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, I walked into James Maxwell's office. It was October 28th, 2024, Hannah's wedding day. Maxwell sat behind his desk, a mug of coffee beside him, reviewing a stack of printed documents. When I stepped inside, he looked up. Mr. Walker, he said calmly. How are you holding up? I'm fine. That wasn't true, but it was the easiest answer. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I sat down, my hands folded tightly together. The police opened an investigation last night, I said. Detective Daniel Carter. Fraud Division. Maxwell nodded with approval. That's exactly the direction we want this going. And the title company froze the escrow account, I continued. $578,000. Charles Bennett confirmed it personally. Excellent, Maxwell said. That removes their biggest payday. He leaned back slightly in his chair. We're building a strong legal case, he said. But there's still one more step I recommend. What step you should call Hannah? I stared at him. Warn her, Maxwell said calmly. Give her one final opportunity to fix this before the situation becomes irreversible. You think she'll listen? I asked. Maybe not, he admitted. But legally it strengthens your position. If you warn her and she chooses to ignore that warning, it demonstrates clear intent to continue the fraud. I looked out the large window behind him. The Phoenix skyline shimmered in the morning sunlight. And if I don't call Maxwell's voice softened slightly, then she could end up facing criminal charges without ever knowing she had a chance to stop. I closed my eyes. She was my daughter. Even after everything she had done, she was still my daughter. All right, I said quietly. I'll call. Maxwell slid his phone across the desk. Use mine, he said, in case she blocked your number. I picked up the phone and dialed Hannah's number. It rang 3 times. Then she answered, hello? Her voice sounded cheerful. Light. She didn't recognize the number. Hannah, I said. It's me. Silence followed immediately. Then her tone changed. Dad. The warmth disappeared. What do you want? We need to talk. I'm getting ready for my wedding, she said sharply. This isn't a good time. Hannah, I said slowly. I know what you did. Silence again. The power of attorney. I continued. The bank withdrawals. The attempt to sell the Tempe house. Another pause. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Don't lie to me, I replied quietly. I spent 30 years working in banking. I know fraud when I see it. You gave me that power of attorney, she shot back. You signed it yourself. You forged the notary, I said. There was a sudden stillness on the line. Margaret Phillips's notary license expired on August 30th. And I continued. And on September 16th, the day you claimed she witnessed the signature, she was in Sacramento, visiting her daughter. Silence. Hannah, I said carefully, I hired a private investigator. I know more than you think. What do you mean I know about Kyle? Her voice sharpened instantly. What about him? He has a 4-year-old daughter, I said. Her name is Chloe. Her mother is Melissa Rodriguez, a dental hygienist living in Tempe. That's not true. He owes $42,000 in unpaid child support, I continued. There's an outstanding warrant for his arrest. You're lying, she snapped. And the people you met as his parents, I said. Linda and Richard Reed. More silence. They aren't his parents, I finished. They're actors. Their real names are Denise Crawford and Alan Porter. He paid them $4,500 to pretend to be his family. I heard her breathing grow faster. Hannah Kyle Reid is a con artist, I said gently. He's done this before. He scammed Michelle Torres in Denver for $95,000. Jennifer Adams in San Diego for $67,000. You're making this up, she shouted. You hate him. You never wanted me to be happy. That's not true. You're jealous, she screamed. You've been alone for 3 years and you can't stand that I found someone? Hannah, please. No, her voice cracked into angry sobs. You listen to me. You've always blamed me for Mom. My heart stopped. That's not... You think her death was my fault? She continued through tears. You stopped calling. You stopped visiting. You made me feel like I was never enough. Like I could never replace her, Hannah. I'm done with you, she said coldly. Don't call me again. Don't come to my wedding. I don't want you in my life anymore. The line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed against my ear. Maxwell watched silently from across the desk. Slowly, I lowered the phone. My hands were shaking. She hung up, I said quietly. I heard. Frank Donovan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the office, stood and walked over. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Stephen? She chose him, I said. My voice sounded empty. She chose a con artist over her own father. Frank sighed softly. She's scared, he said. And he's manipulating her. That's how men like him operate. Then I'll have to save her, I said, even if she hates me for it. Maxwell opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. He slid it across the desk. The investigator sent this over about an hour ago, he said, earlier than expected. I looked down at the folder. Kyle Reid, full background investigation, Michael Brooks, private investigator, October 28th, 2024. I opened it. The first page summarized everything. Subject: Kyle Michael Reid, DOB, March 15th, 1990, age 34. Residence Optima, Kierland Apartments, Scottsdale, lease $2, $400 per month, employment. None confirmed, claims to be a real estate investor, criminal record, 2021, Denver, Colorado fraud, victim, Michelle Torres, amount $95, 000. Charges filed, suspect fled, jurisdiction 2022, San Diego, California. Fraud, victim, Jennifer Adams. Amount $67, 000. Charges filed, suspect fled. Jurisdiction, outstanding warrants, Maricopa County, Arizona. Failure to pay, child support. Amount owed $42, 000. Issued, June 2023. Assets, none debt credit cards. $78,000 across 5 accounts. Car lease, BMW. 5. Series $850 per month. 2 months overdue, child support. $42, 000 arrears. I turned to the next page. Family background. Linda Reid and Richard Reid are not the subject's biological parents. Real identities: Denise Crawford, 57, actress/waitress Tempe Allen Porter, 61, retired car salesman Mesa. Both were hired through an online advertisement in July 2024. Payment: Denise Crawford, $2,500. Allen Porter, $2,000. Agreement: attend 2 dinners posing as Kyle Reid parents. Both individuals confirmed the arrangement during interview and provided payment records and text messages. I slowly closed the folder. He's done this before. Yes, Maxwell said. And Hannah doesn't know. Not yet. I exhaled slowly. What happens now? Maxwell leaned forward. Now we wait. For what? The wedding will happen, he said. Kyle believes he has succeeded. He thinks he's taken the money and escaped. And then we move. How long? A few days, maybe a week, Maxwell said. Detective Carter needs time to secure the warrants and gather statements. He folded his hands. But when the time comes, it will happen quickly. I stood up. I should go. Mister, Walker Maxwell said as I reached the door. I stopped. You did the right thing, he said, calling her, warning her. She may not understand today, but someday she will. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure that was true. I stepped outside into the bright Phoenix morning. Somewhere across the city, my daughter was preparing to walk down the aisle. She was marrying a man who had stolen from me, a man who had lied to her about everything, And today there was nothing I could do to stop it. Not today. But soon. I went home. What else was I supposed to do? I couldn't go to the wedding. Hannah had made that clear. So I sat at my kitchen table, opened the PI report, and started reading. 37 pages. Kyle Michael Reed, Full Background Investigation. By Michael Brooks, Private Investigator. October 28th, 2024. Page 1 summary. I'd already read this part in Maxwell's office. Kyle Reed, 34 years old, unemployed, criminal record, outstanding warrants. But the details were in the rest of the report. Page 3, criminal history, 2021, Denver, Colorado, victim Michelle Torres. 29 marketing manager, amount stolen $95. 000 method. Kyle claimed his family owned a restaurant and needed capital to expand. Michelle took out a personal loan to invest. 2 weeks later, Kyle vanished. Changed his phone number, deleted all social media accounts, left the state. Police report filed, no arrest made. Kyle fled to California. 2022, San Diego, California, victim Jennifer Adams. 32, nurse amount, stolen $67,000. Method, Kyle claimed his mother needed emergency surgery and he didn't have insurance. Jennifer gave him her savings. He disappeared the next day. Police report filed, classified as a civil matter by local PD. No arrest made. Kyle fled to Arizona. I set the report down and stared at the wall. He'd done this before, twice, and he was doing it again, to my daughter. Page 8, financial profile, current debts, credit cards, $78,000 across 5 accounts, all maxed out. Car lease, BMW, 5. Series $850 per month. 2 months overdue. Repossession, pending. Apartment rent, Optima, Kierland, $2,400 per month. 1 month overdue. Gambling debts, $12,000 owed to online casinos. Child support, $42,000. Arrears, $1. $200 per month current order. Total debt, $132,000 plus assets. None identified income, none verifiable. He was drowning, and he was using my money, my daughter, to stay afloat. Page 14. Business investigation. Reed Properties. LLC. Business registration. None. Tax filings. None. Employees. None. Office location. None. Website created. June 2024 using a free template Wix. No legitimate content. No client testimonials. No project portfolio. Conclusion. Reed Properties, Waldi, LLC is a fabrication. The business does not exist. I thought about that dinner in July. Linda and Richard Reed talking about their family business. How proud they were of Kyle. All lies. Page 19. Parents investigation, Linda Reed equals Denise Crawford. Age 57. Occupation actress/waitress. Tempa hired. July 2024, via online ad payment $2. 500 role pose as Kyle's mother at 2 family dinners. Evidence contract, signed text messages, payment receipt, Venmo. Photograph from dinner, The Arrogant Butcher, July 12th. 2024 PI interview. Denise confirmed arrangement. Quote, I thought it was harmless, just acting. I didn't know he was stealing from anyone. Richard Reed equals Alan Porter. Age 61, occupation retired car salesman, Mesa hired. July 2024 via same ad payment $2. 000 role pose as Kyle's father at 2 family dinners, evidence contract, signed text messages, payment receipt, PI interview, Alan confirmed. Quote, I needed the money. I'm living on Social Security. $2,000 for 2 dinners seemed easy. I feel terrible now. I closed my eyes. I'd sat across the table from them. I'd believed them. I'd thought they were a nice family. Page 25, Chloe Reed and Melissa Rodriguez. Melissa Rodriguez, age 30, occupation. dental hygienist, Tempe relationship. Dated, Kyle Reed, 2018 to 2019. Chloe Reed, age 4, DOB, June 15th, 2020. Father Kyle Reed, DN. A-test, confirmed court ordered, 2021. Child support order, $1,200 per month. Arrears, $42. 000. Kyle has not paid since order issued. Warrant issued June 2023 for failure to pay. Recent development, October 2024. Kyle wired $15,000 to Melissa Rodriguez on October 24th, 2024. First payment in 3 years. Source of funds. Unknown presumed stolen from Stephen Walker. P. I spoke with Melissa. Quote, he said he came into some money. I thought maybe he'd finally gotten a job. I had no idea it was stolen. Analysis. Kyle likely paid partial child support to clear the warrant and avoid arrest before obtaining a marriage license. I felt sick. He'd used my money, my daughter's theft, to pay off his debt to another woman, so he could marry Hannah without getting arrested. My phone rang. Detective Daniel Carter. Mr. Walker, I wanted to update you. We have enough evidence for an arrest warrant, multiple counts fraud, identity theft, forgery, elder financial abuse. That's why I'm calling. I need you to let the wedding happen. I stood up. What? If we move now, if we arrest Kyle before the ceremony, Hannah might panic. She might destroy evidence, delete emails, erase bank records, claim she was coerced. She was coerced. Maybe, but we need her cooperation. And the best way to get that is to let her see what kind of man she married. Let her realize on her own that she made a mistake. How long do I have to wait? A few days, maybe a week. Let them go on their honeymoon. Let Kyle think he got away with it. Then we arrest him. And Hannah. She'll be questioned. If she cooperates, the DA might offer a plea deal, reduce charges, probation instead of prison. And if she doesn't, then she goes down with him. I hung up. It was 1 o'clock. The wedding was at 6. I sat at the table staring at the report for hours. At 5:30, I got in my car. I wasn't going to the wedding, but I needed to see it. I needed to know this was real. 6 p.m., the Clayton house. Scottsdale, I parked across the street, far enough that no one would notice me, close enough that I could see. The venue was beautiful. String lights, white flowers, a small crowd, maybe 50 people gathered on the lawn. And then I saw her, Hannah, in a white dress, hair done, makeup perfect. She looked radiant. She looked happy. Kyle stood at the altar in a tuxedo, smiling confident like he'd won. The guests were cheering. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and watched my daughter marry a con artist. With my money. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, but this ends tonight. The address sat in my phone like a loaded gun, 1847 South Mill Avenue, Tempe, Arizona. Apartment 2B. It was November 5th, 10 in the morning, and I was driving south on I-10 toward the woman my daughter's husband had abandoned 3 years ago. The private investigator had handed me her contact information, along with everything else, photos of a little girl with Kyle's eyes, court documents for unpaid child support, text messages begging for grocery money that had gone unanswered for months. Melissa Rodriguez, 30 years old, dental hygienist, single mother. One more victim in Kyle Reed long trail of wreckage. I parked outside a modest 2-story apartment complex with faded stucco and a cracked pool. The kind of place where people work 2 jobs and still struggle to make rent. I climbed the stairs slowly, my banker instinct screaming that I was about to hear something I didn't want to know. She answered on the first knock. Melissa was petite with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and tired eyes that looked older than 30. She wore scrubs pale blue, the kind you see in dental offices, and held the door halfway open, cautious. Mr. Walker. Yes, thank you for agreeing to meet. She stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was small but clean. A kid's drawing taped to the fridge. A basket of laundry on the couch. The faint smell of toast. In the corner, a little girl sat on the floor coloring with crayons. 4 years old, dark curls, Kyle's sharp jawline and his mother's soft eyes. Chloe. She's beautiful, I said quietly. Melissa's expression softened just a fraction. She's my whole world. We sat at a small kitchen table. Melissa poured 2 cups of coffee. Her hands steady, but her voice brittle. I met Kyle in 2018, she began. At a charity event in Scottsdale. He was charming, confident, well-dressed. He told me he was a real estate investor, said he owned properties all over the valley. I nodded, the same script, the same lie. We dated for about a year. He was intense, romantic. He'd show up with flowers, take me to expensive restaurants. I thought I'd found someone who actually saw me, I understand. Then I got pregnant. Her voice dropped, and everything changed. She stared into her coffee. At first he said he was excited, said we'd get married, buy a house, build a life. But the closer I got to my due date, the more distant he became. Missed appointments, stopped answering calls. When did he leave? December 2020. Chloe was 6 months old. Melissa's jaw tightened. He packed his things one night while I was at work, left a note that said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't seen him since. 6 months old. I thought of Hannah at 6 months old, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, her laughter filling our home. The idea of walking away from that, of abandoning your own child, made my stomach turn. Did he ever pay child support? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not a dime. I took him to court in 2021, got a DNA test, got a support order for $1,200 a month. He ignored it, moved apartments, changed his phone number, disappeared. She shook her head bitterly. The state issued a warrant in June 2023. I figured I'd never see a cent. But last month out of nowhere, $15,000 showed up in my account. Melissa looked at me, confused and wary. Wire transfer, no note, no explanation. I didn't know what to think. My chest tightened. $15,000. October 24th. The same day Hannah had wired $90,000 from my savings account. It was my money, I said quietly. Melissa's face went pale. What? Kyle stole $225,000 from me. He used my daughter to do it. That $15,000 he sent you, it wasn't his. It was mine. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then her hand covered her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought maybe he'd finally... She stopped shaking her head. I should have known better. You have nothing to apologize for, I said firmly. He manipulated you just like he manipulated my daughter, just like he manipulated everyone. Melissa wiped her eyes. Why would he send it now, after 3 years? Because he needed to clear the warrant before he could get a marriage license. He married my daughter on October 28th. He used my money to buy his freedom so he could trap her. The disgust on her face mirrored my own. From the corner, Chloe looked up. Mommy, can I have juice? Melissa's expression shifted instantly, soft protective. Of course, baby. She poured a small cup of apple juice and handed it to her daughter, brushing a curl from Chloe's forehead. The tenderness in that gesture broke something inside me. I thought of Hannah at 4 years old. Pigtails and scraped knees and absolute trust in her father. Where had I lost her? I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. $5,000 in cash. Money I'd withdrawn from a separate account Kyle hadn't touched. This is for Chloe, I said, setting it on the table. Melissa's eyes widened. Mr. Walker, I can't... Yes, you can. You've been raising his daughter alone for 3 years. You deserve support, and so does she. I met her gaze. I can't undo what he did, but I can try to help. Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll testify. She blinked. Testify. Kyle is going to face charges for fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. If you're willing your testimony about the child, support the abandonment, the $15,000, it'll help put him away. Melissa looked at Chloe, then back at me. Her voice was steel. I'll testify. He needs to be held accountable for what he's done. Thank you. I stood. Melissa walked me to the door, Chloe trailing behind her, clutching a stuffed bunny. Mr. Walker, I turned. Your daughter, do you think she knows about Chloe? I don't think so, but she will. Melissa nodded slowly. I hope she's okay. I hope she gets out before he destroys her, too. So do I. I drove home in silence, hands tight on the wheel. Kyle Reed wasn't just a con man. He was a destroyer of families. He left Melissa alone with a baby. He drained my life savings. He manipulated my daughter into betraying her own father. And he almost succeeded. But not anymore. Because now, I had Melissa. I had the bank records. I had the evidence. And I wasn't going to let him destroy one more family. The call came late on Friday night, 3 days after I met Melissa Rodriguez and her daughter Chloe. I was sitting in my kitchen again, in the same chair where I had first discovered the empty accounts weeks earlier. My laptop was closed now, the paperwork stacked neatly beside it, but the memory of that moment still lingered like a bruise. My phone buzzed against the table. Hannah's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I let it ring once, twice, before finally answering. "Hello, Hannah." Her voice came through the speaker like ice. "We need to talk." No greeting. No attempt at civility. Just cold, precise hostility. "I'm listening," I replied. "You need to drop the lawsuit," she said immediately. "You need to call the bank and tell them to unfreeze the accounts. And you need to contact the title company and release the escrow on the Tempe house." I leaned back slowly in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. "Or," I asked. There was no hesitation in her answer. "Or Kyle and I will file a petition with the court to have you declared incompetent." My stomach tightened, but my voice remained steady. "Incompetent." "That's right," she continued. Her tone sounded rehearsed, almost scripted. "We'll request a psychological evaluation. We'll ask for a guardianship hearing. And if necessary, we'll have you placed in a memory care facility." I repeated her words quietly. "A memory care facility." "Yes," she said. "You're 58 years old, Dad. You're showing signs of confusion, paranoia, memory loss. You signed documents you claim you don't remember. You're making irrational accusations against your own family. A judge will see that clearly." Behind her voice, I could hear another one, low controlled and calm. Kyle. He was standing nearby, coaching her, guiding every sentence. "How much does a place like that cost?" I asked quietly. "Around $8,500 a month," she replied. "Don't worry, we'll make sure you're taken care of. $8,500 a month, for the rest of my life, locked away. Stripped of my independence, while they drained whatever remained of my savings. It was a brilliant plan. Efficient, legal, cruel. You've clearly thought this through," I said. "We have," Hannah replied sharply. "So here's how this is going to work. You're going to admit you made a mistake. You're going to apologize. And you're going to fix this. Or you'll destroy me," I said. "Or we'll protect you," she corrected. "From yourself." I closed my eyes. For a moment I saw Catherine. Then I saw Hannah as a little girl sitting at the kitchen table with crayons scattered everywhere drawing superheroes. Then I remembered Melissa Rodriguez holding a frightened 4-year-old child Kyle had abandoned. And something inside me finally hardened. Enough. "Hannah," I said quietly, "before you do that, there are a few things you should know about your husband. I don't want to hear this. In 2021, Kyle Reed defrauded a woman named Michelle Torres in Denver. I continued calmly. He convinced her to invest $95,000 in a fake restaurant business. She lost her entire retirement fund. The line went silent. In 2022, he repeated the same scam I went on. Jennifer Adams in San Diego, $67,000. He told her his mother needed emergency surgery. There was no mother, and no surgery. That's a lie," Hannah snapped. "Your in-laws Linda and Richard Reed aren't real," I said. "What their real names are, Denise Crawford and Alan Porter. They're actors. Kyle paid them $4,500 to pretend to be his parents at the dinner in July." I heard her breathing change. Faster now, uneven. "And there's one more thing," I said. "Hannah Kyle Reed has a 4-year-old daughter." Silence. "Her name is Chloe," I continued. "Her mother is Melissa Rodriguez, a dental hygienist living in Tempe. Kyle hasn't paid child support in 3 years. He owes $42,000 and there's an outstanding warrant for his arrest." "You're lying," she whispered. "He transferred $15,000 to Melissa on October 24th, I said quietly, "the same day you wired $90,000 from my savings account. He used my money to clear the warrant so he could marry you." "Stop it. He's a professional con artist," Hannah, I said. "He's been running variations of this scam for years. And you helped him do it." Suddenly, Hannah's voice moved away from the phone. "Kyle!" she shouted. Her voice trembled with anger and panic. "Kyle, what is he talking about? What daughter? What actors?" I heard Kyle's voice in the background, low, urgent, trying to regain control. "Baby, he's lying. He's trying to manipulate you. Who the hell is Melissa Rodriguez?" Hannah screamed. "Hannah, listen to me. Who is Denise Crawford?" The line erupted into chaos, Hannah yelling, Kyle shouting over her, objects crashing somewhere in the background, Glass, maybe a plate. Then the call abruptly disconnected. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the kitchen table. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. 30 seconds later, it rang again. "Unknown number," I answered. "Hello, Mr. Walker," a trembling female voice said. "This is Denise Crawford." I straightened in my chair. "Ms. Crawford, I need to talk to you," she said shakily. "About Kyle. I'm listening." She took a deep breath. It sounded like she had been crying. "When he hired me, I didn't know what he was doing," she said. "He told me it was a harmless surprise. He said his girlfriend's parents had passed away, and he wanted to give her a family dinner experience before proposing. And you believed him?" I said. "I'm an actress," she replied quietly. "I take whatever work I can get. $2,500 for one dinner seemed like easy money." Her voice cracked. "But then I saw the news," she said. "I saw your name, I saw the lawsuit, and I realized I helped him steal from you." "Yes," I said softly. "You did." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking completely. "I have a father. He's 73. If someone did this to him, I'd lose my mind." She paused. "I want to help fix this," she continued. "I'll testify. I'll give you the contract, the text messages, the payment records, everything." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Crawford. I'm sorry," she whispered again. Then the call ended. I sat alone in the dark kitchen phone, resting loosely in my hand. The weight of the past 2 weeks pressed down on my chest like a stone. Then someone knocked on the door. I didn't move. The knock came again. "Stephen," a familiar voice called out. "It's Frank. Open up." I stood and let him in. Frank Donovan took one look at my face and guided me back toward the kitchen table without asking a single question. He moved around the kitchen quietly, filling the coffee maker and turning it on. A few minutes later, he placed a steaming mug in front of me and sat down. "She called," I said finally. "Hannah," he asked. "Yes. What happened?" "She threatened to have me declared incompetent," I said. "Guardianship, memory care facility, $8,500 a month." Frank's jaw tightened. Jesus. Then I told her everything I said. About Chloe, about Melissa, about the fake parents. I looked up at him. She didn't know Frank, and now she does. I nodded. Frank leaned forward, his voice steady and firm. "Listen to me," he said. "You didn't destroy her marriage. She'll think I did. Maybe right now," he said, "but you didn't ruin her life." He squeezed my shoulder. "You saved it." I stared down at my coffee. "I just wish it didn't have to happen like this." "I know," Frank said quietly. We sat there in silence, two aging men at a kitchen table, and somewhere across Phoenix, my daughter's entire world was collapsing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sunday morning, November 10th. James Maxwell's office was quiet. The hallways empty except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on Camelback Road. I sat across from Maxwell at his desk, a yellow legal pad between us, covered in names and notes. Frank Donovan sat to my right, arms crossed, his face set in grim determination. "Let's go through the witness list one more time," Maxwell said, tapping his pen against the pad. "Preliminary hearing is in 6 days. We need everyone locked in." I nodded. "Go ahead." "Denise Crawford," he began, "also known as Linda Reed. She's agreed to testify about the fake parent scheme. She'll bring the contract Kyle gave her, the text messages, and the Venmo receipts showing he paid her $2,500. She called me Friday night," I said. She sounded genuinely remorseful. "Good. Remorse plays well in court." Maxwell made a note. "Alan Porter, Richard Reed. Same deal, $2,000. He's on board. Between the two of them, we can prove Kyle fabricated his entire family background." Frank leaned forward. "What about the women he scammed before? Michelle Torres, Denver, 2021. $95,000 stolen through a fake restaurant investment scheme. She's willing to testify via Zoom." Maxwell flipped a page. "Jennifer Adams, San Diego, 2022. 67,000. Same story, fake crisis, fake urgency, real money. She'll also testify remotely." I felt a flicker of gratitude toward these women. They didn't have to come forward. They could have stayed silent, buried. The shame moved on. But they chose to speak. "And Melissa Rodriguez?" I asked. "She's local, so she'll appear in person. Single mother, 4-year-old daughter, 3 years of unpaid child support. Her testimony establishes a pattern of abandonment and financial irresponsibility." Maxwell looked at me. "She'll be compelling." I thought of Chloe coloring on the floor of that small apartment. "She's a good mother. She deserves justice. She'll get it. Maxwell set down his pen. Now the harder part. Detective Carter called me yesterday. I straightened. What did he say? Hannah is also under investigation. The words hung in the air like a blade. For what? Frank asked, though. We all knew the answer. Conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, forgery. She directly withdrew funds from your accounts using the forged power of attorney. She signed the documents. She facilitated the sale of the rental property. Maxwell's voice was clinical, detached. The state has enough evidence to charge her as a co-conspirator. My chest tightened. How much time? If convicted, 18 months to 3 years. 3 years. My daughter in prison. Jesus, Frank muttered. Maxwell leaned back in his chair. The prosecutor is willing to offer a deal. What kind of deal? Hannah testifies against Kyle. Full cooperation. She provides documentation, communications, anything that ties him to the fraud. In exchange, the prosecutor will recommend a suspended sentence, probations, community service, restitution, but no jail time. I stared at him. And if she refuses, then she goes to trial. And if she's convicted, she serves the full sentence. Frank looked at me. Has she been contacted? Carter tried to reach her yesterday. She didn't answer. He left a message explaining the situation and gave her until Wednesday to respond. Wednesday. 3 days from now. What do you think she'll do? Frank asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't know. Would she cooperate? Would she finally see Kyle for what he was, a liar, a thief, a man who had used her to destroy her own father? Or would she refuse? Would she stand by him? Convinced that I was the villain, that this was all some elaborate scheme to control her life, I thought of the girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The girl who drew pictures of superheroes. The girl who promised to take care of me after her mother passed. And I thought of the woman who had threatened to lock me in a memory care facility. I didn't know which version of Hannah would show up on Wednesday. Stephen, Maxwell's voice pulled me back. Sorry, what? I asked if you want me to reach out to her, lawyer to lawyer. Explain the situation. I hesitated. Would it help? It might. Sometimes hearing it from a neutral party makes a difference. Do it, I said, but don't pressure her. Just make sure she understands what she's facing. Maxwell nodded. I will. We finished the meeting an hour later. Frank walked me to my car, his hand on my shoulder. She'll do the right thing, he said. I hope so. She's your daughter, Stephen. Deep down, she knows the truth. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I'd spent the last 2 weeks learning that the people you trust the most can hurt you the deepest. The night of November 15th, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the preliminary hearing. Tomorrow, a judge would decide whether there was enough evidence to move forward with charges against Kyle Reed. And somewhere across the valley, Hannah was making a choice. Cooperate and save herself. Refuse and go down with the man who had destroyed us both. I thought of Catherine and wondered what she would say. Wondered if she would forgive me for what I was about to do to our daughter. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from James Maxwell. Hannah's attorney just called. She's in. She'll testify. Preliminary hearing is still on for tomorrow 9 a.m. I read the message 3 times. Then I set the phone down, closed my eyes, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She chose the truth. She chose to survive. And maybe she chose me. The Maricopa County Superior Court sat like a concrete fortress in downtown Phoenix, its glass and steel facade glinting in the early morning sun. I arrived at 8 o'clock, my tie knotted too tight, my hands clammy, despite the dry November air. Frank met me at the entrance. He didn't say anything, just clapped me on the shoulder and walked beside me through security through the lobby, up the elevator to the 3rd floor. James Maxwell was waiting outside courtroom 3C, briefcase in hand, his expression calm and professional. Ready? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. Kyle's already inside. He was transferred from the 4th Avenue jail this morning. And Hannah? Maxwell's face tightened. She's not coming. My stomach dropped. What do you mean she's not coming? She said she'd testify. She will, but not today. This is just the preliminary hearing. The judge will decide if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. Hannah's testimony comes later. He paused. She asked to stay away from the courthouse today. She's struggling. I wanted to ask more, but the bailiff opened the door and called us inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of empty benches. A handful of people sat scattered in the gallery, journalists, I guessed, or curious onlookers. I took a seat in the front row, Frank beside me, Maxwell at the prosecutor's table. And then they brought him in. Kyle Reed. He wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his hair disheveled, his face pale and unshaven. Gone was the polished confidence, the expensive suit, the Tag Heuer watch. He looked smaller now, diminished. But when his eyes found mine, they burned with rage. He stared at me across the courtroom. His jaw clenched, his expression promising violence. I held his gaze and didn't look away. You did this to yourself, I thought. Not me. The bailiff announced the judge, Honorable Margaret Finch, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took her seat, opened a file, and looked at Kyle without a trace of sympathy. Mr. Reed, you are charged with 8 counts. Please remain standing. Kyle stood, his public defender, a tired-looking man, in an ill-fitting suit beside him. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Ortega, rose from her table. Your Honor, the state charges the defendant with the following: Count 1, elder financial abuse, Arizona Revised Statutes Section 46-456. The defendant, through fraudulent means, obtained $225,100 from the victim Stephen Walker, age 58. Count 2, forgery, ARS 13-2002. The defendant facilitated the creation of forged power of attorney documents bearing a falsified notary seal. Count 3, fraudulent schemes and artifices, ARS 13-2310. The defendant engaged in a pattern of deception to unlawfully obtain money and property. Count 4, theft, ARS 13-1802. The defendant unlawfully took control of the victim's financial assets. Count 5, identity theft, ARS 13-2008. The defendant used falsified documents to impersonate authorized authority over the victim's accounts. Count 6, child support evasion, ARS 25-681. The defendant owes $42,000 in unpaid child support and has evaded legal obligations for 3 years. Counts 7 and 8, additional conspiracy and fraud charges related to prior victims in Colorado and California. Judge Finch looked at Kyle. How do you plead? Kyle's lawyer cleared his throat. Not guilty, Your Honor. Noted. Ms. Ortega, call your first witness. For the next 2 hours, I watched the case against Kyle Reed unfold like a landslide. Denise Crawford took the stand first. She was nervous, her voice shaking, but she told the truth. She described the contract, the $2,500, the text messages where Kyle had coached her on what to say at the dinner. She presented the Venmo receipts, the fake script he'd given her. Kyle's face went red. Alan Porter followed. Same story. $2,000, a paid performance. He handed over his contract and his phone records. Kyle whispered furiously to his lawyer. Melissa Rodriguez was next. She sat in the witness chair with quiet dignity, her hands folded in her lap, and told the judge about Chloe, about the abandoned pregnancy, about 3 years of silence, 3 years of unpaid support, about the sudden $15,000 payment on October 24th, the same day my savings account had been drained. Kyle stared at the table. Then came the Zoom testimony. Michelle Torres, calling in from Denver, described how Kyle had convinced her to invest $95,000 in a non-existent restaurant. Her voice broke when she said she'd lost her retirement savings. Jennifer Adams from San Diego recounted a nearly identical scam, $67,000. A fabricated story about his mother's surgery. No mother, no surgery. By the time the last witness finished, Kyle looked like a cornered animal. Judge Finch reviewed her notes. Mr. Reed, I find sufficient evidence to bind you over for trial on all 8 counts. Bail is set at $500,000. $500,000. Kyle's lawyer leaned over, whispered something. Kyle's face went ashen. Your Honor. The lawyer said, my client does not have the resources. Then he'll remain in custody until trial. Judge Finch's gavel came down. We're adjourned. Kyle was led away in handcuffs. He looked back once, his eyes locking on mine. I didn't flinch. Outside the courthouse, the desert sun beat down on the pavement, shimmering in waves of heat. I loosened my tie and took a breath. Detective Daniel Carter approached, his badge clipped to his belt. Mr. Walker? A word. Frank and Maxwell stepped aside. Carter lowered his voice. We'll be issuing a warrant for your daughter within 48 hours. Conspiracy, fraud, forgery. She'll need to turn herself in. My chest tightened. She agreed to cooperate. I know. And that'll help her. But she still committed crimes. The law doesn't care if she was manipulated. Carter's expression softened. I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy. Will she go to jail? Depends on the judge. If she cooperates, fully testifies, shows remorse, probably probation. But she'll have a record. I nodded slowly. Thank you, detective. He walked away. I stood there on the courthouse steps, the noise of the city buzzing around me, cars, voices, the distant wail of a siren. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. I opened it. Dad, I need to talk. Hannah. I stared at the screen. 4 words. After 2 weeks of silence. After threats, lies, theft. Dad, I need to talk. Frank stepped beside me. What is it? I showed him the message. He exhaled slowly. What are you going to do? I looked up at the courthouse, then back at the phone. I don't know, I said quietly. But I knew I couldn't ignore her. Not yet. If you're still following Steven's journey, comment, still here, so I know you're with me. Your support really means a lot. Before we continue, a quick note. The next part includes some dramatized elements added for storytelling impact. If that style isn't for you, it's completely okay to stop here. Thank you for watching this far. The cafe in Old Town Scottsdale was quiet at 4 in the afternoon. I sat near the back, black coffee untouched, waiting. Hannah walked in 7 minutes late. I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, hair in a messy ponytail. Oversized gray sweater jeans. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She sat down across from me without a word. Hi, Dad. Her voice was barely audible. Hi, sweetheart. Silence stretched between us. She twisted her fingers together, staring at the table. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. For everything. For the money, for the house, for what I said about Mom, about the nursing home. I didn't mean it. I was just... Her voice broke. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying not to cry. I waited. Kyle told me you wouldn't even notice, she said, tears spilling over. He said you had so much money that taking a little wouldn't hurt you. He said you'd want to help me. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him, because I was desperate. She looked up at me, her face wet. I'm $28,000 in debt, Dad. Credit cards. I was about to be evicted. I didn't know what to do. $28,000. Why didn't you come to me? I asked quietly. Why didn't you just ask? She shook her head. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to think I was a failure. Her voice dropped. And because after Mom died, you disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally. You were there, but you weren't there. I tried to talk to you, but you didn't want me. You wanted her. The words hit like a punch. I felt like I lost both my parents that day, she whispered, and I've been trying to get you back ever since. I stared at her, my throat tight. She was right. After Catherine's accident, I'd fallen into grief so deep I couldn't see daylight. I'd stopped answering calls, stopped living. I'd abandoned my daughter when she needed me most. Mom, I said, my voice rough. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That's why I didn't say anything. She wiped her eyes. Kyle knew. He knew I was angry. He knew I felt abandoned. And he used it. He told me you owed me. That taking the money wasn't stealing. It was taking what was already mine. And now I know he lied about everything. The investments, the properties, his parents, his whole life. Her face twisted with shame. I helped him steal from my own father, and I can't take it back. I reached across the table and took her hand. She flinched, then gripped my fingers like a lifeline. I forgive you, I said. She shook her head violently. You shouldn't. I don't deserve... Hannah, look at me. She did, tears streaming. I forgive you. You made a mistake. You were manipulated. But you're still my daughter, and I love you. She broke. She bent forward, sobbing into her hands. I stood, walked around the table, and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder and cried deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they'd been buried for years. I held her and whispered the words I should have said 3 years ago. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. We stayed like that for a long time. At 4:45, the door opened. Detective Daniel Carter stepped inside. Hannah pulled away from me, wiping her face. I called him, she said quietly. I need to do this. I need to face what I did. Carter approached. Ms. Walker, are you ready? She stood her legs shaky. Yes. He didn't cuff her small mercy, but he placed a hand on her elbow and guided her toward the door. Hannah stopped and turned back. Dad, do you really forgive me? I looked at my daughter, broken, ashamed, desperate for grace. I already have, I said, but you need to forgive yourself first. She smiled just a little and nodded. Then Detective Carter led her out into the Scottsdale sunlight. I stood at the window and watched them walk to the unmarked sedan, watched Hannah climb into the back seat, watched the car pull away carrying my daughter toward a future I couldn't control, and I realized something. I'd gotten her back. Not the version of Hannah I'd lost 3 years ago. Not the little girl with pigtails and crayons, but the woman she was now, flawed, broken, real. She was going to face charges. She was going to plead guilty. She might serve time, but she was mine again. And that was enough. The Maricopa County Superior Court was cold on the morning of January 15th. I sat in the front row alone, my hands folded in my lap, watching as the bailiff called the room to order. All rise. The Honorable Margaret Finch presiding. The courtroom stood. Judge Finch entered, her gray hair pinned back, her expression unreadable. She took her seat and surveyed the room. The state of Arizona versus Kyle Michael Reed and Hannah Marie Walker. Please be seated. I sat. Kyle was led in, first wearing the same orange jumpsuit from the preliminary hearing, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner now, his face hollow, his eyes dark. He glanced at me once, a flicker of rage, then looked away. Hannah came next. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked small, fragile. When her eyes found mine, I gave her a small nod. She nodded back, then sat beside her public defender. The trial lasted 3 days. On the first day, the prosecutor presented the timeline, the forged power of attorney, the unauthorized withdrawals, the fake boutique, the sale of the rental property, every transaction, every lie, every manipulation laid out in cold clinical detail. Michelle Torres testified via Zoom from Denver. She spoke calmly, but her voice shook when she described losing $95,000 to Kyle's fake restaurant scheme. Jennifer Adams followed. San Diego, $67,000, a fabricated story about a dying mother. She cried on the screen. On the second day, Denise Crawford and Alan Porter took the stand. They each described the fake parent scheme, the contracts, the script Kyle had given them. Denise apologized to me directly from the witness chair. I'm so sorry, Mr. Walker. I didn't know. Melissa Rodriguez testified in person. She held herself together until the prosecutor asked about Chloe. Then her voice broke. He left when she was 6 months old. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. Until he sent $15,000 in October, money he stole from Mr. Walker. Kyle stared at the table, jaw clenched. On the third day, I took the stand. The prosecutor asked me to describe the fraud. I did step by step. The missing money, the forged documents, the hospital visit where Hannah had tricked me into signing the power of attorney while I was weak and feverish. Mr. Walker, the prosecutor said, your daughter participated in this fraud. She withdrew funds. She facilitated the sale of your property. How do you feel about that? I looked at Hannah. She was staring at her hands, tears streaming down her face. My daughter stole my money, I said quietly, but Kyle Reed stole her soul. The courtroom was silent. He manipulated her. He exploited her grief, her loneliness, her desperation. She made a terrible mistake, but he's the one who made her believe it was justified. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Then it was Hannah's turn. She walked to the stand slowly, her hands trembling. The prosecutor asked her to recount the fraud. She did, her voice shaking, stopping every few sentences to wipe her eyes. I lied to my father. I forged his signature on documents. I took his money. I helped Kyle sell his house. She looked at me, her face wet. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Kyle's lawyer stood. Ms. Walker, you're testifying against Mr. Reed to save yourself, aren't you? No, Hannah said. I'm testifying because what we did was wrong, and I need to take responsibility. You expect this court to believe? Objection, the prosecutor said, badgering the witness. Sustained. Kyle's lawyer sat down frustrated. Then Kyle himself took the stand. He denied everything, said Hannah had acted alone, said he'd tried to stop her, said I was the one lying trying to frame him because I disapproved of the relationship. The jury didn't buy it. When Hannah's lawyer cross-examined him, Kyle lost his composure. He pointed at Hannah, his voice rising. "She's lying. She's the one who planned everything. She used me." Hannah flinched but didn't look away. "Mr. Reed," the judge said sharply, "control yourself or you'll be removed from the courtroom." Kyle sat back seething. On January 19th, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. Judge Finch sentenced Kyle first. "Mr. Reed, you have demonstrated a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and financial exploitation spanning multiple years and multiple victims. You preyed on vulnerable people, including the elderly and a single mother. This court sentences you to 5 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $275,100 to Stephen Walker and $42,000 in child support to Melissa Rodriguez." Kyle's face went white. Then the judge turned to Hannah. "Ms. Walker, you participated willingly in this fraud. However, the court acknowledges that you were manipulated by Mr. Reed and that you have shown genuine remorse. You have cooperated fully with the prosecution. This court sentences you to 18 months in the Arizona Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are jointly responsible for restitution alongside Mr. Reed." Hannah nodded, tears streaming. The bailiffs led them away. Kyle didn't look back. Hannah did. Her eyes found mine one last time before the door closed. 2 days later, I sat in the visitation room at the Perryville Women's Facility. Hannah walked in wearing a tan jumpsuit, her hair shorter now, her face pale but calm. She sat down across from me, a sheet of plexiglass between us. We picked up the phones. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart." She smiled just a little. 18 months. "I know. That's a long time." I shook my head. "It's nothing. I'll wait for you. 18 months. I can wait." Her eyes filled with tears. "You really mean that?" "I do." She pressed her hand against the glass. I pressed mine against hers. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too." We sat like that for a long time, 2 hands separated by plexiglass holding on. The letter arrived in March 2025, 2 months after the trial. Plain white envelope, Perryville return address, Hannah's handwriting. I opened it at the kitchen table. "Dear Dad, I don't know how to start this. I've written it a dozen times. My therapist says I need to stop running from the hard things. I'm sorry. For stealing from you. For lying. For what I said about Mom. I've been going to therapy twice a week. I'm learning things I didn't want to see. How I blamed you for Mom's death because it was easier than accepting she was gone. How I let Kyle manipulate me. How I convinced myself stealing wasn't really stealing because I was angry. None of it was your fault, Dad. You were grieving. You were human. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I'm trying to become the person you raised me to be. The person Mom would have wanted me to be. I love you, Dad." Hannah, I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully. That night, I wrote back, "Dear Hannah, I received your letter. Thank you for being honest. You don't need to keep apologizing. I've already forgiven you. What you need to do now is forgive yourself. I'm proud of you for going to therapy. That takes courage. I want you to know something. No matter what you did, no matter what happens, I choose to love you. That's not conditional. It's just true. 18 months will pass. I'll be here when they do. Love, Dad." I mailed it the next morning. The months that followed were quiet. Spring turned to summer to fall. The house felt empty, but it was a different kind of empty. Not hollow grief, but waiting. In April, Frank convinced me to volunteer at the Phoenix Public Library again. I started teaching elder financial abuse workshops twice a month. I told my story carefully without names and watched seniors lean forward taking notes. "How did you know something was wrong?" someone asked. I didn't, not at first. I trusted the person who hurt me. That's what makes it so hard. After one session, a man in his 70s approached me, hands shaking. "My son's been taking money from my account. I didn't know who to tell." I gave him James Maxwell's card. "Call this lawyer, he'll help you." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." I thought of Hannah, how easily I could have stayed silent. But I hadn't. And maybe this man wouldn't either. In June, I used part of the restitution money trickling in from Kyle's prison wages and set up a small fund. $5,000, the Catherine Walker Elder Protection Fund. Money to help other victims pay for legal fees, counseling, basic needs. Frank helped me file the paperwork. Catherine would be proud. I hope so. Letters from Hannah came every 2 weeks. She told me about therapy sessions, her job in the prison library, the book club she'd joined. She told me about the women she'd met, all trying to survive their mistakes. There's a woman here named Maria. She embezzled money to pay for her daughter's cancer treatment. She's been here 3 years. She says the hardest part isn't the time, it's the guilt. I understand that now. I wrote back every time. Short notes. Updates about the house, Frank's terrible golf game, the workshops, the fund. You're doing good work, Dad, she wrote in October. I'm proud of you. I cried when I read that. In November, Frank invited me to Thanksgiving at his daughter's house. I almost said no. The thought of celebrating while Hannah sat in a cell felt unbearable. But I went. Frank's grandkids ran around shrieking. His daughter handed me a plate of turkey. I ate, smiled when I was supposed to. On the drive home, Frank asked, "You doing okay?" "I'm managing." She'll be out in 7 months." I know. December came. I put up a small Christmas tree for the first time since Catherine passed. I hung a few ornaments, plugged in the lights, and stared at it. On Christmas Eve, I wrote, "Hannah. Dear Hannah, I miss you." I don't say that enough, but it's true. I put up a tree this year. Maybe because I wanted to remember when you were little. Maybe because I needed to believe good things can come back. 6 more months. We're almost there. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Love, Dad. January arrived cold and clear. I marked days on the kitchen calendar. 18 months minus 13. 5 to go. In February, Hannah's letter was different. Dear Dad, I've been thinking about what happens when I get out. I'm scared. Scared I won't find a job. Scared people will judge me. Scared I'll disappoint you again. But I'm also hopeful. I've changed, Dad. I understand now what I did. Not just to you, but to myself. I let anger and fear make my decisions. I won't do that again. I don't know what my life will look like in 4 months. But I know I want you in it, if you'll still have me. Love, Hannah, I wrote back immediately. Dear Hannah, of course I'll have you. You're my daughter. That hasn't changed. It never will. You're going to be okay, better than okay. You're going to build a life you're proud of. And I'll be here to help, however I can. 4 more months. I'm counting down with you. Love, Dad. On the last night of February, I sat on the back porch wrapped in a jacket, staring up at the desert sky. The stars were bright and endless. I thought about the last 18 months. The theft, the trial, the letters, the waiting. I thought about Catherine, about the promise I'd made to protect our daughter. I'd failed for a long time, but in the end, I'd kept it. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Hannah's drawing from 1999, my daddy the hero. The crayon lines faded the paper soft. I stared at it for a long time. We made it, Catherine, I whispered into the cold desert air. 4 more months, we're gonna make it. And for the first time in years, I believed it. When I look back on everything that happened, I no longer see only betrayal. I see silence, grief, and the mistakes I made while trying to survive loss. What began as a family story about stolen money slowly revealed something deeper. It was a family story about distance, pride, and the quiet walls we build when pain becomes too heavy to share. I believed strength meant enduring everything alone. Time has shown me that real strength sometimes means speaking before the silence grows too wide. If this family story offers any lesson, it is this: never ignore warning signs, simply because they come from someone you love. Trust does not mean blindness. Read the documents placed in front of you. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. And most importantly, stay present in the lives of the people who matter to you. When grief or pride creates emotional distance, that empty space can become the doorway through which manipulation enters. Some people might call what happens to family betrayal, and they would not be entirely wrong. This journey was shaped by family betrayal, painful choices, and difficult consequences. But the deeper truth is that revenge was never the goal. What some might label as revenge was simply an attempt to stop the damage before it destroyed everything. When someone you love is trapped in deception, sometimes the hardest act of love is exposing the truth. In that sense, this wasn't about punishment. It was about confronting family betrayal without allowing it to define the future. Justice matters. Accountability matters. But grace matters too. I believe that God does not waste pain. Even the hardest moments can shape us into wiser, stronger people if we allow them to. Yes, I lost money. Yes, I lost peace for a long time. But in the end, I found something far more valuable. I found my daughter again. And that is worth more than any number in a bank account. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If this story touched you, Leave a comment and tell me honestly. What would you do if you were in a father's position betrayed by your own child? Yet forced to choose between justice and mercy, I truly want to hear your thoughts. And if stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Please remember that while this narrative reflects real social issues, some elements have been dramatized for storytelling. If this type of content isn't your style, that's completely okay. There are many other videos you might enjoy instead.